Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
President Trump says chips are the next target. Welcome to the Tuesday edition, the early side Balance of Power, as President Trump promises tariffs on semiconductors in the next week or so before he gets to Pharma. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. A lot of questions about what this means, Kailey, particularly when it comes to the likes of NVIDIA and AMD and Donald Trump's new friend, Jensen Huang.
Yeah, what exactly will the tariff rate on semiconductors be? Will there be carve-outs for any specific companies? These are questions we just simply don't know the answer to yet. We get a little bit more clarity on what the tariffs could look like for pharmaceuticals, at least over a period of time. They'll start lower, go higher over the course of 12 to 18 months, potentially getting as high as 250%. And that's just some of what we learned from President Trump earlier today. He also suggested in an interview on another network that he's taking Scott Bessent out of the running to be the next chair of the Federal Reserve, mostly because Bessent would like to stay at Treasury.
Says he wants to continue working with him, that it's been an honor. So I guess we can at least take one off the list here, but still questions about which Kevin might be getting a closer look from the president right now. Some market-moving comments to your points on Pharma. This is not great news for the likes of Eli Lilly and the rest of the sector that are feeling the weight of those remarks. Chips have been hanging in there pretty well, though. Most investors saw this coming.
Yeah, again, he's been forecasting this for some time. He's been talking about these sectoral tariffs, keeping in mind, of course, that this is just days ahead of what is expected to be the implementation on tariffs on a broad array of our trading partners come the end of this week, with the deadline on China specifically still looming out there on August 12th and no deal yet. We're going to get into all of this with Sarah Bianchi, formerly of the USTR in the Biden administration. This
will be good. We were told by Mike Shepard earlier, keep your eye on chip manufacturing makers before the chip makers themselves. That could really be a game changer for the industry. So we'll talk about that ahead.
Indeed, we will. And keeping an eye on chips and every other sector in financial and equity markets today is Amy Morris. So let's check in with her now. She's with us here in Washington. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Kailey. Stocks wiped out gains. A disappointing reading on U.S. services raised more concerns about the outlook for corporate America. The services sector is effectively stagnated in July. Firms were reducing their headcount. We check those markets for you all day long at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 now down 0.3%. NASDAQ still down about 0.5%, but look at the Dow. It's just flat. Ooh, now a little changed on the upside. Maybe we're seeing a comeback. We'll keep an eye on it. The Kremlin is weighing options for a concession to President Trump, including an air truce with Ukraine to try to head off the threat of secondary sanctions. That has moved energy markets. WTI and Brent crude about 1.3% lower now. Palantir Technologies reporting a 48% increase in revenue for the second quarter to more than $1 billion, citing the astonishing impact of AI technology on its businesses. Shares of Palantir about 7% higher after the company revised its sales higher for the year. Swiss President Karen Keller-Sutter flying to Washington, D.C. to facilitate meetings with U.S. authorities at, quote, short notice and hold talks about the 39% tariff imposed by President Trump. And President Trump says Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told him he didn't want to be nominated to replace Jay Powell as the next chair of the Federal Reserve. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's go back to Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
All right, Amy Morris checking in on trading on this Tuesday. Thank you so much. Meantime, it's our only Tuesday, and already we have a lot of tariff news we're grappling with, and more tariff news we're expecting over the course of the next week or so, as it is at the end of this week, not even August 7th, when the U.S. is set to start collecting higher levies on a number of trading partners after they were told what tariff rate on their exports would be charged last Friday on August 1st. Then, of course, there's the August 12th deadline that the current détente between the U.S. and China is set to expire at, and in the next week or so.
Yeah.
Timing to be determined here, I suppose, Joe. We're expecting we'll finally get the long-awaited announcement of sectoral tariffs on two key industries, semiconductors and pharmaceuticals.
She did that all off the top of her head. I was watching. Yeah, it's a lot of dates to be swimming through here, and it looks like the chips could be coming, at least the chip tariff, semiconductors, in the next 2 or 3 weeks, next week or two, based on the language we heard from President Trump this morning in an interview on another network. It's where we start our conversation with Laura Davison, who is with us now, our deputy bureau chief here in Washington. Laura's job is, of course, to cut through all the noise. And when you have a half an hour long weave like that, frankly, not a lot of news in that conversation. But this one got our attention, and it's something that investors have been waiting for. Was there anything new when it came to chip tariffs? Do we have a number? Do we have a more exact timeline?
We don't, other than it is a week or so in Trump world. That can mean a week or it could mean months. But he's made several comments now in recent weeks that, kind of by the end of the month, that this is sort of something that the USTR, U.S. Trade Rep, is getting close to. This is one of those, we're going to get a little nerdy here, the 232 tariffs. These are the ones that are about a national emergency. These are the ones that have staying power. This is the same authority he used in his first term. So these are not likely to get caught up in the courts. The reciprocal tariffs, those tariffs that are on countries, those are the ones that could get a little bit tricky. And you're starting to see the White House think about, okay, if the courts come down and strike down some of these, how do we implement our tariff strategy in a way that the courts will uphold? That's going to be, after we get through this spate of dates of different deadlines coming up, that's kind of the long-term strategy of what's going on at the White House.
Yeah, it's a good point that there's a massive legal question around the use of the IEPA authority to implement these kind of tariffs broadly on countries, like, for example, Laura, Switzerland, which, of course, last week learned it was going to be paying a 39% tariff, or rather that tariff would be charged on its exports to the United States. Surprising Switzerland to the extent that now the Swiss president is rushing to D.C. to try to get something of a better deal. Is this likely to go anywhere, or is it 39% starting to be collected on the 7th, just 2 days from now?
This is entirely up to Trump. The reason they are at a 39% tariff is because of a call that went badly with the Swiss president last week ahead of that August 1st deadline, where they really were talking about trade deficits, things that the U.S. President Trump did not want to hear at all. They're trying to rectify that now. I anticipate the tone of this conversation is going to be a lot different, but will there be enough groveling for Trump to say, okay, we'll bring you down to more in line with other EU nations?
Well, apparently they're showing up without an invitation. Is that correct, from the White House? You just get on a plane and hope for the best, knock on the door. Will the president let them in?
We will see. This is really a sort of a high-stakes negotiation. Trump, however, loves this. He loves when people, kind of come to him, sort of, our supplicants are asking for his forgiveness. He has a public event this afternoon. He's signing an executive order. So we may get a sense of where his state of mind is on these negotiations in just a couple hours.
And the one thing I forgot to mention that also falls within this week or so timeline is come Friday. That's the deadline he gave Russia to agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine, or else implement secondary tariffs or secondary sanctions. I'm not sure we have full clarity, Laura, as to what exactly he is willing to implement on Friday if there is no agreement, even as we learned that Russia is at least considering an air truce with Ukraine, even if not a full ceasefire.
And even before then, he said he would put more tariffs on India within the next 24 hours because of their purchases of Russian oil. So you have all of these, as Joe said, a weave of tariffs that's coming together that makes it very difficult for markets to figure out what's coming. These timelines are all subject to Trump's whims, and this is just a very, very difficult moment. And that's why we're seeing some of this economic data come in lower than expected. Services were lower. We also saw, of course, the very infamous now jobs report last week.
How much of this is purposeful in its confusion to keep, I guess, our trading partners or maybe other countries on their heels to some extent, as opposed to changing the subject from Jeffrey Epstein? And I bring that up because there is news today that the House Republicans have subpoenaed the DOJ, along with former President Clinton, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and unredacted complete Epstein files. I don't know if you see that happening by the deadline on August 19th, but this is obviously something that the White House does not want us to be talking about.
There's really two tracks here for the White House. One, it helps to distract from Epstein. Clearly, Republicans on the Hill, they're not even in town, but they're still working on this Epstein issue. I think what we saw yesterday in terms of the Justice Department also announcing they were going to investigate the Russiagate scenario, going back and investigate Obama-era officials over the Russia's involvement in the 2016 election. This is kind of a multi-pronged strategy from the Trump administration to distract and pivot the narrative. Also, it's important to remember that they just also don't have a lot of these deals negotiated. They haven't made up their mind. They haven't finished the investigations, and that they've been, doing tariffs on dozens of different fronts. And Trump likes to leave these things to the very last minute and make up his mind only when he has to.
All right, Laura Davison, our deputy bureau chief here in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, as we consider the president making up his mind or not on tariffs of all different shapes and sizes, we turn now to Sarah Bianchi, who, of course, served as deputy U.S. Trade Representative executive during the Biden administration. She's now Senior Managing Director and Chief Strategist of International Political Affairs and Public Policy at Evercore ISI. Sarah, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and Radio. If we could just begin with what was a very big number put out by the president today, the suggestion that tariffs on pharmaceuticals, when and if they are announced, could ultimately go as high as 250%, just not immediately, to allow for some more onshoring of that industry here in the United States. How long of a window do you really need to leave to allow that kind of supply chain reorientation to happen? Will 250% tariffs, the threat of it, actually make a difference on, say, things like drug prices that American people are faced with at the pharmacy?
Well, 250 is certainly a very, very big number. And it is particularly interesting because in the EU agreement, the EU sends the United States a lot of the drugs that we get. They were given a 15% from the president on pharma. So a lot of confusion about exactly what the president is solving for. Relocating a manufacturing facility or building one in the United States is very, very time-consuming and expensive. You need to get FDA approval, among other things. I think it'll be interesting to see what part of the drug chain, supply chain is the president looking for. There's all the way down from the very basic inputs like API to generic drugs. Many of those come from India to some of the more advanced drugs from the EU. So I think we have a lot to learn from the president about exactly what he is seeking to achieve here.
Interesting. We're talking about, to your point, two very specialized industries. And you've already expressed that when it comes to pharma. When you talk about chips as well, it takes a very long time to build a chip foundry. And there seems to be an expectation in the White House that these things can happen, including auto manufacturing back in the U.S., very quickly. You throw a switch and we're making iPhones here in the United States. What would be more difficult to reshore, chips or pharmaceuticals?
Well, they're both very, very, very challenging. Their chips may be even more complex, but they're both very, very difficult and not totally clear that there will be a cost advantage of doing that. I think with the CHIPS investigation, really what I'm looking for is how much is the president looking to just tariff the chips themselves that come in? That's more in the $50 billion range. Or how wide is he willing to go with products that have chips in them? In that case, you can get to about 300 billion of imports. So what I'm really looking for on the chips is to see how much of the derivative products is he looking for. And if not, again, you might find that what the tariffs encourage is countries to send chips to other places first and have them embedded in a product and then come to the U.S. So how these tariffs are designed makes a big difference in how the industry responds.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as you talk about chips being embedded in other products, it reminds me of the idea of where things are originating, in what form or from where they ultimately come to the United States. Knowing, Sarah, part of what is set to be collected beginning August 7th is also a 40% tariff on transshipped goods, though we've lacked a great deal of clarity as to how exactly those rules would be designed, how they would be tracked and implemented. What is your expectation? How difficult is it actually to get accurate transshipment information and charge a levy accordingly?
Well, you have to it's very difficult. What you have to first do is decide, again, what are you trying to solve for? There are some areas where I think there's just abuses now, where things come, say, from China, and they really aren't transformed much in another country, and then they make it on their way to the United States. That kind of crackdown is really just is just more of a customs enforcement thing than anything else. But alternatively, the president could be looking for something like, what about a Chinese factory that's fully built in Vietnam, in Mexico? This is something that the Biden administration looked at around steel. We started to see more steel, Chinese steel come in through Mexico. Or are you trying to solve for BYD? You really have to define here what problem am I solving for? Am I literally talking about any Chinese ownership? And then design your policy accordingly. And transshipment is one where the definitions could certainly run the gamut.
Interesting data today as we find the U.S. trade deficit narrowed in June to the tightest since September of 2023. It is happening. The trade gap down 16% from the prior month to just over $60 billion, lower than expected. To what extent will this trend continue?
Well, certainly, if you tariff things at very high rates, you do get less of them. And particularly while we've had, remember, over this period, we've had a lot of different policies in place, and we had some pre-ordering that happened in advance of the month that could be. So I would say I'd want to see the data for a few more months to see if we can cut out some of the noise as the policy has adjusted. But in general, we should see the trade deficit down. That's obviously a metric that this administration cares a lot about. There's a lot of other metrics that are relevant as well. But on this one, sure, the trade deficit should marginally come down.
Well, and we know that deficits in many ways factor into the calculations the administration has made when setting tariff rates on individual countries. Sarah, to what extent should we expect a dramatic reduction in those actual structural deficits or surpluses, depending obviously on what country we're talking about? But is this an achievable aim to try to bring all of those down substantially?
It really depends. I mean, one of the reasons a lot of people don't just look at trade deficits across the board as a meaningful metric, even though this administration takes them quite seriously, is it can tell you a lot of different things about what's going on. So, for example, from Canada, we get a lot of energy in the United States, pretty cost effective. That's one that's been exempted from some of the tariffs. So that deficit should persist. I think that's probably good for both economies. In other places where you were talking about, the Swiss, sure, they're going to send a lot more things. So it really depends on the country. It depends what composition of their exports to the U.S. are sectoral. But certainly places that are looking to divert to other markets to the degree that there's demand, because this is an expensive way to go. So it may not be that the United States is necessarily exporting any more to that country, but rather they're just sending their goods elsewhere.
Sure. Sorry, Sarah. We were talking earlier about the deadline at the end of the week that the president has put on Russia for secondary sanctions, which sometimes he refers to as tariffs. If that in fact happens, does that jeopardize our potential to make a trade deal with China, or does it hasten an opportunity?
Well, I think there's a lot riding on the trade deal with China, and the administration does seem quite nervous about the potential for China to take additional action or revert to some of the action we've seen on rare earths. So I think they're going to try to not really disrupt that negotiation going into August 12th. So we'll see what he does on this oil front. It shouldn't be a huge but I don't think he's looking to escalate with China. Certainly, it's also an issue with India, where he's been trying to land a deal that's gone a bit sideways of late. So certainly impacts if he goes there. But again, my expectation is that the administration is looking to keep China from not escalating at this point. And my base case is they'll do policies accordingly.
It's great to have you back, as always, Sarah. Evercore ISI, Sarah Bianchi, we appreciate the insights. Our panel's up next here on Bloomberg.
Town is a whole lot less crowded, as it is August, which means Congress is on recess. Both the Senate and the House are either traveling on codels or home in their districts, talking to their constituents. And in the case of several Republican lawmakers who have decided to hold town halls with their constituents in recent days, it hasn't necessarily gone incredibly well, as they try to tout what they see as the positives of the one big beautiful bill that they all just voted for. And those gathered at the town halls seem to see it in a very different light. We saw the most recent evidence of this yesterday when Republican Congressman Flood of Nebraska held a town hall. He's actually the vice chair of the Republican Main Street Caucus. He's been on this program several times. Mike Flood faced down some 700 individuals at a town hall. And let's just get a taste of the reception he got.
We've had this conversation before. We've got Medicare now. We can start rolling back the age 5, 10 years at a time. Would you support that?
We can't afford that.
Why did you cut SNAP and healthcare research?
We do not have unlimited money in the United States.
Lincoln, Nebraska, a room that erupted in chants of tax the rich. This, of course, Kailey, follows our conversation right around this time yesterday with Congressman Brian Stile, Republican from Wisconsin, had a similar experience, although to see hundreds of people lined up around the block in this case for a Mike Flood town hall says a lot about where we are. And it's where we start today with our political panel here on Balance of Power. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are with us. Jeanne, of course, is Senior Democracy Fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Rick is partner at Stonecourt Capital. You know what they're saying, Jeanne, and it's happened at a couple of these, that Democrats packed the room with activists, some people not even from the district, to make trouble for somebody like Mike Flood, who, by the way, is considered a pretty moderate Republican in the grand scheme here in the House. Is that what's going on?
That is part of it. I mean, if we look at the spending numbers, the DNC has already put together and activated a campaign on these very issues. They are flooding the airwaves, online advertisements, billboards, and certainly getting people out to the very few town halls that are being held. By one count, only one or two of the 35 vulnerable Republicans has held a town hall. So have to give credit to Brian Stile, Mike Flood, the ones that are willing to hold these town halls. But the reality is that can't account for all of the energy and frustration that we're hearing at those town halls. It can't be accounted for by Democrats alone. And Republicans have to get on message if they want to fight this. And one big problem they have is, you know, who hasn't been out defending this? Donald Trump. He said on Meet the Press it was so wildly popular that he didn't need to. But the polls say something different. And of course, we heard it in Flood's town hall yesterday. The people on the ground, at least in certain parts of the country, don't think it's quite as popular as the president.
Well, when we consider Republicans trying to get their messaging out, Rick, it does seem that both the lawmakers we're talking about in this instance did come prepared with the messages that they wanted to be able to send to these individuals to defend the various elements of this bill. Hard to do so, though, when you're being drowned out by boos and shouts. Is this productive? Yes, give credit to members who are actually getting out there and doing the FaceTime thing, but is it getting them anywhere at all?
Yeah, as someone who has attended literally thousands of town halls throughout the years, sadly, it was one of John McCain's favorite modes of communication. Letting off some steam is a good thing from time to time, right? I mean, like part of what happens at these is your constituencies have a chance to sort of voice their own opinion in addition to you out there selling what you've just done. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that all in all, there's no such thing as a bad town hall. If the opposition wants to come and crowd it in there and disrupt it, your own voters will sit there and look at that and say, gee, they're being unfair to Brian Stiles or, you know, Mike Flood. But at the end of the day, what you really care about are those voters who are more likely to vote for you and that you have a chance to convey that. And sometimes it's tough. As you point out, it can get out of control. But by and large, I am a big believer in that these guys have to go and face the music. And if you're good at what you do for your day job, then you ought to be able to sell what you just did, in this case, on the reconciliation bill, and answer the questions that people have and give it your best shot. Because if you don't, they will only hear the Democratic talking points, and that ain't going to help you at all.
You know, it's interesting, guys, because the lawmakers who are actually choosing to do town halls, let's just take the two names we've already mentioned here, Brian Stile and now Mike Flood, are not considered MAGA. They're not considered the most conservative members of their conference. In the case of Mike Flood, Jeanne, he was on the program here less than 2 weeks ago. Remember, they had just passed the rescissions package, President's big, beautiful bill, and he actually didn't seem to like any of the procedure around this that has upset a lot of Democrats. Let's back up less than 2 weeks. Mike Flood here on Balance of Power. Listen.
I don't want to talk about rescissions either. We have a process for appropriations. We appropriate the money. We pass a budget. We use our Article 1 authority and our power of the purse to do our job. Listen, I signed up to be in Congress. I signed up to help craft legislation, put budgets together, decide where the spending goes. I don't want to hear the word rescission. I don't want to hear the word impoundment. I really don't even want to hear the word reconciliation. I want to get back to work, and I want to pass a budget.
He doesn't even want to use the word reconciliation, never mind rescission or impoundment, Jeanne. He almost sounds like a Democrat there. What's the problem with Mike Flood?
I don't think there's a problem with Mike Flood, except for the fact that he voted in favor of a bill that he told his constituents he didn't even read. He is 1,000% right. They should move away from rescissions unless they are completely supported with documented evidence, that we should get back to regular order, as Rick likes to say. But you listen to him there, and he sounds like his constituents who were frustrated at that town hall. And he even went out and said that if there's a problem with this bill that I have voted for, we can go back and revisit it and rethink some of it. Very much sounding like Josh Hawley and some other Republicans. But the reality is you voted for the bill, and pulling back on any part of that is going to be all but impossible. So he is acknowledging the frustration his constituents are feeling. You gave a big tax break for the ultra wealthy. You are cutting people off of health care in the millions. You're cutting back on money for food for needy. All the while, they're building a ballroom at the White House for $200 million, and you're standing up there saying, we don't have money. I mean, the number of ways in which people can just go around this is, so must be so frustrating for him, because that he probably is understanding what they're saying, but because he's under the thumb of Trump and the MAGA universe, he hasn't been able to say it, and they're calling him out on that.
We should note that President Trump says he and donors will be footing the bill for that $200 million ballroom. He actually reiterated as much when he was on the roof of the White House earlier today. He told reporters he was just taking a little walk. When he was asked if he was thinking about adding a second story, potentially, he didn't necessarily answer. But he did make the point, Joe, that he would finance any projects himself.
True. Yeah. Look at him up there, by the way. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, the president of the United States walked out on the roof of the West Wing, out of the state dining room. He had the architect of that ballroom that Jeanne mentions, and he held a gaggle from the roof with questions being held up to him, implying they're going to build something up there, Kailey. I wonder if they're going to put a skylight in the briefing room.
I guess we're all going to have to stay tuned on the latest White House renovation project. They are numerous. Apparently, there's more gilding going into the Oval Office as well. We've got the flagpoles. We've got the Rose Garden.
They're doing the ceiling now, I guess.
Yeah, more gold. To get back to what we were just discussing, though, roof adventure aside, Rick, as we consider the messaging around this bill, the struggle Republicans are finding themselves in and trying to defend their positions on this, what does this all mean in reality for 2026? Because some of those unpopular provisions that Jeanne was just referring to won't have even actually been implemented by the time the midterms roll around. So as angry as people might be now, do you see that lasting until next November when they haven't felt the effects yet?
Well, I do think Jeanne makes a good point that that answers to the questions that we're hearing from the Brian Stiles and the Mike Floods are things like, oh, well, I wasn't for this either, or we can change some of this when we get back to Congress. And if you look at the sort of articulation of the concerns people have, especially around the Medicaid, they already get it. I would have thought that until it actually impacted them, they would not have been this vociferous. But whether that's good Democratic talking points or people paying attention, don't care when it actually comes into effect because they know it's going to, and that it's going to affect their families or their families' families. I think they've already been lit up, and the explosion is likely to occur in November of 2026. I don't think it's a wait and see attitude that the public's taking based on some of the anecdotal evidence we're seeing on the ground in front of these districts. And I might add, these are two vulnerable Republicans, right? I mean, these are guys on the Democratic target list to be taken out. And they made a lot of good commercials for their Democratic opponents just by holding these town halls and backing off of what they already had voted for.
Fascinating. Jeanne, are Democrats holding town halls right now, or is there no point?
Yeah, I mean, they are out there. They've got a lot of work to do. They have got to make the case that this bill is against what the president promised when he was running, and that to support the working and the middle class. And they are making a message of repealing it. I don't know if they're going to be successful on that, but I think we should also keep in mind that this all may help explain this push to redistrict in Texas and elsewhere. The Republicans know that they are in a bit of trouble, or a lot of trouble, as they look out and look into 2026. Hence, the argument that we've got to redraw these districts if we're going to hold the House, because we can't defend what we have done when we've been in Congress. And that's going to be a huge, huge talking point for Democrats as well.
All right, Jeanne, Sheehan, Zaino, and Rick Davis, our political panel on this Tuesday. Thank you so much. Jeanne, thank you especially for giving us the opportunity to talk about the president's morning White House roof adventure. We'll have more still ahead here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Good to have you with us here as we update a big story that we talked about at this time yesterday, and that's the effort to redistrict the state of Texas, redrawing congressional maps, a Republican effort prompted in part by President Trump to find 5 new red seats in Texas. This has become a big controversy and one of the biggest stories of the week here in national politics as Democrats fled the state, making this a truly national story, going to places like Albany, Boston. And in the case of State Rep Chris Turner, a Democrat from Texas, went to Chicago. We spoke with him on the late edition of Balance of Power, the update being Governor Greg Abbott ordering the civil arrest of these Democratic lawmakers. Here's the reaction from State Rep Turner.
The wrong here is the fact that in Texas, the way they're going about this is to intentionally discriminate against Black, Hispanic, and Asian Texans by destroying their congressional representation in violation of the Voting Rights Act. I'm confident that, and the history shows that maps in those states you mentioned, California and New York, are in compliance with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So the question is, are people going to follow the Voting Rights Act or are they not? In Texas, the Republicans are not doing that, and that's why we're here, and that's what matters the most.
Of course, the questions don't end there. There's also the question of whether this quorum break will continue through the end of this special session and whether or not Democrats like Chris Turner will face real consequences upon return to their home state. So for more, we turn to our Texas Bureau Chief, Julie Fine, who's joining us from Dallas. Julie, is there any sign of any cracking in Democratic lawmakers' resolve at this point?
There is no sign of cracking up until now. Now, the legislature meets again. They convene at 1 o'clock Central Time. So in about 20 minutes, we'll see if anybody did go back. But at this point, there was a news conference this morning, again with Governor Pritzker and with Ken Martin, who's the head of the DNC. They seem very, very together at this point. Again, this session ends in 2 weeks, so it's really only a week and a half more. The question will really be, Governor Abbott can call session after session after session after session. What happens after this 2-week period, Kailey?
Well, I'm curious what these Democrats are doing in the various cities as we look at Governor Pritzker in Chicago, in Illinois, helping to harbor these lawmakers for the time being. Are they raising money, Julie? Are they having slumber parties at night? What's going on in these remote locations?
Well, I think what they're doing a lot of is what you are seeing on television. They're trying to get a lot of attention to this. So there are certainly a lot of interviews. There are a lot of news conferences. At some point, they're very skittish about discussing the money, as you saw when you talked to Representative Turner yesterday. But at some point, you're looking at $500 a day for a very large group of people. They're going to have to pay for this. And of course, Governor Abbott saying he's looking into how they do that. Another interesting point to note, Senator Cornyn now asking the FBI to be involved, urging them because, as you know, Texas lawmakers cannot, Texas DPS, they can arrest within state lines. So there's a whole other issue there. So now it's a question of what law enforcement will be involved, if they'll actually go to another state.
Julie, thank you so much. Our Texas Bureau Chief, Julie Fine, joining us live from Dallas. And I suspect we're going to be talking again later on today. Julie, it was something, Kailey, when we talked to Rep. Turner last evening, we asked him if he was prepared to go to jail for this. He said, I'm not going to prison. It's a civil warrant, to be clear. But we do wonder if they're going to make their way through the balance of this session, knowing that there are a lot of folks like J.B. Pritzker who are there to help them.
Yeah, and of course, J.B. Pritzker is grabbing some attention for himself as well while he's at it. Of course, first appearing behind jbpritzker.com, campaign-esque backdrop, but also talking about the wider implications here for 2026, why he thinks Republicans are doing this. This is a taste of what Governor Pritzker said earlier today.
Donald Trump, Governor Abbott, Texas Republicans, well, they know that they're headed toward a loss of the Congress in 2026. They're afraid, and they should be. All so that you can give a massive tax break to Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Bill Ackman. Well, frankly, you'd better watch out. You're going to lose your elections.
He's still got the backdrop. J.B. Pritzker from earlier today, by the way, still appearing before cameras and microphones with those Texas Democrats. Great opportunity to compare notes here with Larry Sabato. I'm deeply curious to hear what Larry thinks about this effort to maintain a majority in the House. The founder director, University of Virginia Center for Politics, no stranger to gerrymandering or redistricting. This one's got a little bit of a different wrinkle, Larry, and I'm wondering your thoughts on the strategy here. Would this be enough for Republicans to maintain the thin majority in the House, or start a doom loop of all kinds of other states from California to New York changing their constitutions and redrawing their maps?
This has been very interesting because it reminded me of the old principle of physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. This may be producing more than an equal and opposite reaction, in the sense that several Democratic states are seriously looking at trying to eliminate Republican seats. But I tell you what's really interesting to me, what the Texas Democrats have done, even though in the end, I don't think they're very likely to prevail. The Republicans hold most of the cards in Texas, almost all the cards, actually. What they've done, though, is make this a national issue, and they've gotten the attention of Democrats all over the country. Those Democrats are angry. And as a result, they might actually be willing to do things like pass a referendum in California doing away with nonpartisan redistricting, which they normally would never do because it's one of these good government states, and the good government people often win if they have enough money. And Arnold Schwarzenegger originally helped to organize the campaign when it was passed. Right. So this is worth their doing, if it's only to change the minds of Democrats in other states, and those other states might provide the 5 Democratic seats to balance the 5 they're going to lose in Texas.
Well, Larry, I wonder if it's worth Republicans doing, specifically in Texas, as they try to carve out these 5 additional Republican seats, knowing in part it's leaning on areas that are more heavily Hispanic in terms of population, knowing that there was support for President Trump specifically in those areas in the election. Are they potentially making a miscalculation here that support for President Trump is going to translate to all Republicans as we redraw the map here? Is there actually a risk that it backfires, that it doesn't necessarily work as intended?
Yes, in at least 2 of the 5 districts, that's possible. Instead of a gerrymander, that's called a dummy-mander, when you end up shooting yourself in your own foot by doing this, by trying to spread out your voters, and you spread them too thin in a year that is not favorable to you, which 2026 might be for the Republicans. It's too early to say. If there's a recession, I guarantee you Democrats will be taking over the House, or even if there's a significant slowdown. But if there isn't, I think Republicans have an even chance of keeping the House as well as the Senate.
Well, that's interesting because we hear a lot about history at this point in the cycle, Larry, and we're reminded that Republicans are historically on their heels at a time like this. And when you have a majority that you can count on one hand, or a gap that you can count on one hand, it makes you wonder if history has anything to do with this cycle.
Well, it does. And you look at history and you say, well, the odds are the Democrats will be able to pick up the tiny number of seats they need to take control of the House. However, how quickly we forget. In 1998, which to me wasn't that long ago, in 1998, Clinton and the Democrats gained House seats because Americans were angry at the Republicans for trying to impeach Clinton. And then in 2002, the next midterm election, George W. Bush and the Republicans gained seats in the House of Representatives because of the reaction to 9/11. So you just never know. Things look solid, they look predictable, and they turn out not to be.
Well, so when we consider what we are seeing, and we just spent a great deal of time, Larry, discussing this with our political panel, what we're seeing from Republican lawmakers who dare to have town halls in their home districts with their constituents over this recess period, is that sending a foreboding 2026 signal to you, or do you see that largely as the people who are angriest, perhaps already not aligned with these individuals politically, being the ones to turn out and make noise?
Yeah, it's not a good sign for Republicans. On the other hand, there's a lot of time to go before people actually start voting at the end of September 2026 all the way to early November of 2026. A lot can happen. But you know what's interesting? People are saying, well, these town halls are not representative. They don't really mean anything. Democrats are showing up in large numbers. They have the energy to do it. And the Republicans are not showing a comparable energy to match them. Well, what matters in midterm elections? With lower turnouts, energy matters.
Well, that's interesting because it's so anecdotal, Larry, but clearly you're acknowledging the power of this moment. I grew up in New England where town halls were considered a way of life, and they don't happen as often anymore. They're resorting to teletown halls, or in some cases not holding them at all. I guess my question is, who goes to town halls anymore? Who are these people?
You have a core of partisans on both sides that will show up at almost anything unless they're on vacation or something. They'll come anytime. But you also have an added increment of people who have been angered by something, by X, whatever it is. During Biden's term, some of the Democrats had problems with town halls. Now, with Trump, the Republicans are having trouble because so many people are getting angry about potentially having their Medicaid cut off or having their food supplements shut down, whatever it may be. There's always something. And if you listen to Congressman Flood's long town hall, I didn't listen to every minute of it, but I listened to most of it. Every complaint you can think of under the sun was brought up at one time or another. It's not like everybody was concerned about the same thing, though the Epstein files seemed to unify Democrats, Republicans, and all the factions.
Well, and I wonder how that is going to play out when lawmakers return to Washington next month. Larry, before we let you go, obviously we've talked about how this redistricting battle factors into 2026, but I'd also like to ask you about how it factors into 2028. As we just noted, J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, taking a bit of an opportunity here to put himself in front of the cameras. California Governor Gavin Newsom making a great deal of noise as well. How much of this is setting the stage for 4 years from now? 3 years from now?
There are going to be potentially so many Democratic candidates running and quite a few Republicans, but I bet it's far more Democrats than Republicans, that they look for ways to advertise what they think Democrats want. And I think they're right. What do Democrats want? They want some anger. They want to see their representatives stepping up. They want to nominate somebody who isn't going to sit back and let the Republicans run all over them. That's why so many Democrats right now have a negative opinion of their own party. The Republicans are much more positive about their party than Democrats are about theirs. So it's a plus for those potential candidates. It may also help the Democratic Party as a whole.
All right, Larry, great to have you back here on Balance of Power. Larry Sabato, the founder and director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics, here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio on this redistricting battle. And of course, Joe, we're going to have more on this in the late edition of Balance of Power at 5 p.m. Speak with a few lawmakers, both at the state and federal level from Texas as this fight is ongoing. And we consider the implications it will have for next year, for years down the road, as this is, we were just discussing, could spread well beyond Texas all across the country.
Oh, that's for sure. And keep your eyes on New York and California, as we've been saying. What is he reading about Indiana as a possibility this morning, Kailey? So we'll have a lot more on that. Great to see Larry Sabato. It brings us back to the campaign trail, right? And God knows we'll have a few campaigns to be following in the near future. As Kailey mentioned, though, meet us on the late edition of Balance of Power. That starts at 5 p.m. Eastern.
In the meantime, Bloomberg Business Week Daily will be straight ahead. They'll have more on the other stories we're tracking that matter to financial markets, including everything President Trump said today in regard to tariffs. It was a lot. We'll have more of a breakdown on that later on this afternoon as well. So stay with us on Bloomberg TV and radio.